G'day, I'm Justin Duggan. Welcome to Anchored Outdoors and to my funky kitchen, where I'm going to talk about a not so funky subject, which is rod, reel and line maintenance for fly fishing. So thanks to April for the opportunity, and I'm going to punch straight into it because this needs to be a fairly brief segment and there's a bit to get through. So if you end up with reels looking like this, you've probably not done a lot of maintenance. In the case of this reel, it was left in the bottom of a boat for a couple of months. And believe it or not, it's still usable, but it's not the way I would like my gear to look when I go out fishing. So how do we look after our gear? Firstly, if you're a freshwater angler, things are a lot easier for you because freshwater is a lot more friendly to our gear than saltwater is. So most of this talk will be about saltwater, but it certainly will apply to some sections of freshwater fishing as well. Now, modern fly reels are generally much better at allowing you to maintain them in a more, I guess, user-friendly way that doesn't damage the reel as much. And what I mean by that is when you are washing salt water off, it is very possible that you can get the fresh water into parts of the reel you don't want, and that can affect the usability of the reel. Modern reels generally, like this one, are well sealed. They can actually even handle immersion in water, although I don't recommend that as a general practice. But it means that I can wash these reels very well when I get home from a saltwater fishing day. Now, the first thing I want to say about reel maintenance is actually setting up your reel the right way will prevent a lot of heartache down the track. Something that is not well known by a lot of anglers is that if you put braided or Dacron backing onto a saltwater fly fishing reel, the salt will eventually wick its way through the backing down to the arbor of the reel, and it will create, as has happened in this reel, corrosion against the spool. And I don't care how well anodized your reel is, it will create corrosion and it will eventually eat through the reel, as has pretty much happened here. Now, that's not the reel's problem, that's the owner's problem. And the reason being, firstly, when that was set up, I didn't put any protection there to stop the salt water wicking into the arbor of the reel. So what I do now is I add a bit of carnauba car wax onto the reel when I'm spooling it. So I'll get a little sponge, bit of the wax, and I'll wax all underneath, just a very light coating. I'll put my backing on. I'll add a very thin strip of adhesive tape to hold the backing from slipping because it is car wax, it is a little more slippery. I'll do one very thin wrap of that around. I'll coat a bit more wax on top of that and a couple of layers of the backing so that I have a full protective coating of wax there. Then what I'll do is I'll spool up my reel, and then periodically, maybe once every 12 months, I'll take the backing off and just give it a clean up and a wash. But that's a great way to start your setup so that you don't end up with this corrosion. Now, once you get back from each trip, if you've got this style of reel, the spool comes off, the housing is separate. The housing gets a rinse in a bucket of very, very mildly soapy warm water, just really quickly with the drag done up to full. Rinse that off, back your drag off, and lay that upside down like that to dry off. Upside down so no water can get in. It's unlikely it ever will, but just to be safe, I always dry them that way. That is the best thing to do. Do not soak that part of the reel in water for any length of time. You risk water ingress. Even in a well-sealed reel, it is possible water can get in there. So don't do it. You don't even need to do it. You're just trying to get that little bit of salt off the reel. With the spool, there is no moving parts in that. There is likely to be salt water that is wicked down through the backing and under the fly line. So I'm going to soak that in a bucket of mildly soapy water. I'm talking a couple of drops of sunlight soap, something like that, very mild. Going to soak that in the bucket for an hour or two, or sometimes just overnight. And then you're going to dry it very, very thoroughly. It could take a day or two to dry out. If you have a cold condition or cold conditions, but you want that perfectly dry. Before you put that reel away, make sure that the pouch it's going into doesn't have any salt on it. If it's been sitting in the bottom of a boat or got some salt on it, don't put the reel into a salty pouch. You'll have to wash that pouch as well. Now, it's pretty simple with the rod. With the fly rod, you're just going to basically get back from your trip, and in the case of a lot of people, they wash their hair and they wash their rod. They basically jump in the shower, wash their hair and wash the rod at the same time. In my case, a bit hard to wash my hair, so I go outside to the tap, give it a really, really good rinse with the tap, leave that to dry outside. It doesn't take too long. Once that's solidly dry, I'll take a bit of food grade silicone spray and I'll just do a light little coating onto the guides. I would usually just place it on a rag and then rub that on the guides, because I want to add a protective layer so the next time I go out that those guides are well protected from salt and so on, because they are metal, and whilst they're very, very well made and generally don't rust too much, it does help with corrosion as well. Not too much. We don't want to be coating our fly lines as they go through the guides with silicone. That's not what we want. We just want a really light little rub of silicone there to protect those guides. Make sure that if you've got any salt on your rod bag, that you clean the rod bags first, stick them in the wash, and try not to ever put a salty fly rod into a clean fly rod bag, because now you put salt inside the bag and you're basically going to have to wash your bag every time. If you can't avoid it, just remember they all have to be clean before they're stored. Now, in the case of your fly lines, it's very important that when you get back, you clean your fly lines as well once they're dry. Now, the fly lines are generally, each manufacturer creates or has a fly line cleaner for their individual lines. A lot of them also have these micro abrasive pads. So there's two things. You want to clean your fly line with these micro abrasive pads to get the dirt off, right? So there's scum and dirt on the fly lines that gets there in freshwater or salt water. The pads are very good at getting that off. But then to keep your line slick, something like, in the case of Rio, they make a product called Agent X, which makes the line slick and also helps it float higher. And the other manufacturers like Scientific Angler and so on, they all have their own coatings and cleaners for their individual lines. So make sure you have both a micro-abrasive cleaning cloth and a fly line cleaning solution or cream. It's basically, it's like a creamy solution. Now that's really good on floating line, but it's not something you want to put on sinking or intermediate lines. So with sinking and intermediate lines, just use the abrasive pads. But if you've got a floating line, then use the cleaning solutions, which will help the line float higher. Obviously, that's not something you want with a sinking line, because you don't want to make it float, you want it to sink. So that's really important. Don't use anything else on your fly lines. Don't use silicone sprays. There's some weird recipes on the internet. There's a huge amount of chemical engineering that's gone into modern fly lines, and I can tell you the way these lines work and even the way they self-lubricate is really, really amazing, but it's also critical that you don't do anything or add anything that can affect the components in the fly line. That's very important. Anyhow, I think that's the bulk of the talk. One more thing I should add. If you've got the older style reels, not like the modern ones, but the older style reels like this old Able, now this has a spool that has to be, I have to undo it with a screwdriver to get it apart, but there's moving parts in the spool and the reel housing. So the main housing has a drag system with grease and so on, and the spool has bearings inside of it. I can't soak that in water. So the best thing you can do is grab your hose onto a mist or fine spray or one of those spray bottles and just lightly spray the reel. Take your fly line, pull it off into a bucket of just very lightly soapy water, get the salt off it, maybe spray around your backing, and then periodically, once every 6 to 12 months, take your backing off and give it a clean. So that's really important. That's for the old style reels. Anyhow, that's enough to chew on for now. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks to April for the opportunity. It's a wonderful website at Anchored. It's a great campfire around which we can all warm and glow our hands around fishing and hunting and all things outdoors. So keep having a look at that site, looking at everything that April's done. It's pretty magical, and thanks for the opportunity, and I'll see you out there on the water.